will not be answered, but please submit your question and we will add those to the question and answer documents that will come out following this. So to start with, funding update. As many of you will be aware, amendments were requested for the term of the funding from 18 months to 12 months. This has been done. This has been completed as our end. There's no outstanding requirements from our end now. We are just awaiting confirmation of those changes from the other parties. We're as eagerly awaiting those as everybody who is on this webinar. And as soon as that confirmation comes, we will, of course, be updating accordingly. One thing I wanted to add, and this is a question that's come up quite regularly over the last week, is Plan Bs, Plan Cs. Now, we've always had Plan Bs and Plan Cs, but we haven't really discussed because we've not wanted to create any doubts with the funding line that we've been talking about for so long now. So bear in mind, we expected completion of this funding line back in March. As you all know, or as I hope most of you know, matters outside of our control has created delays that we have experienced and taking us now to late June, or I think it's even 1st of July now. In the background, because the car finance sector is so attractive to new investors, and I appreciate the frustration that everybody has shown, hence the webinars and the updates that we've had. But aside from all of that, the car finance claim sector, as far as litigation funding goes, has become a very attractive sector to be in. There's a lot of money coming into the sector with law firms, with funders like ourselves, because there's a large degree of certainty now going forward with the redress scheme. Yes, there are complications to it, but as things are progressing, there's a lot of interest in this space. We have also had such interest generated, and we have for a few months now. So we have two additional. So when we've been asked the question, I think this was actually one of the questions that was given after during last week's webinar. What Plan B, what Plan C have we in place? So in answer to the question that came in, we have got two other sizable funders who are looking at considerable US dollar investments, because from a new funder's perspective, they know the outcome of the case. We've talked about this quite a lot in updates. We've talked about this in the webinar, that the judgment being handed down in the Johnson element of the Supreme Court hearing, which was last April, judgment handed down in August, provided that certainty of the outcome of any future car finance claims. Of course, litigation funders, investors, institutional investors like that degree of certainty. So having that in place, having a degree of certainty over the length of time these claims are going to take, additional funders are looking at coming into the marketplace, hence why you will see a lot more adverts now for car finance claims. So Plan B and Plan C that we've had in answer to the question posed last week is that, yes, there are two significant funders. They're not going to complete this week and probably not next week, but they are very, very close to the finishing line. And as I said, both of those are substantial US dollars. So I hope that answers the question that was posed, and also is intended as a bit of reassurance that we are not just relying on this one funder with the delays that we have experienced over recent weeks. So as we are now, that is the updates that we have with the funding lines. I'll hand over to Anne-Marie, who's going to summarise and discuss the two significant judgments that have been handed down this week in the sector that we are in. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And I just want to reiterate Pete's message at the beginning. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you continue to enjoy to join us over the coming weeks. But we've had sort of two very significant. One is a judgment, and one is a hearing on, and they both directly impact on PCP. So I'm going to walk you through each one, and then I'm going to tie it together and explain to you what impact they could have. So the first one is, as we've discussed, the delays to the FOS redress scheme are because of the 4 legal challenges that are now lodged and to be heard in the upper tribunal. There was a hearing on Monday of this week, and it was 5+ hours long. It was very intense, and the representations were made by each of the 3 defendant banks, the claimant law firm, and the FCA. And there was a myriad of different issues that were argued that would take far too long for us to be able to deal with that in the next hour. But we in this week's update, we will be submitting a summary of that with our update on Friday. But the key takeaways from that hearing is that there are arguments in favour and arguments against delays in when the hearing will occur. Now, we largely anticipated the hearing to be in October of this year, and that's the information we gave. It became clear on Monday that hearing is not going to happen in October. At best, it's going to be at the end of this year. At worst, it's going to be in spring. And there's arguments from both sides in the hearing on Monday about disclosure and evidentiary burdens and whatnot. And until they are agreed, that's when we'll get an actual timetable for the hearing. But what is very clear is that there will be delays, okay? That's not great. We all know it's not great. But it's our responsibility to tell you what the factual position is. The delays could mean that we're not going to see settlements until spring of next year. Okay? So we are now looking at that position, and it makes our funding even more important than ever. So we are even more protective over this funding to ensure that nothing damages it or harms it, to make sure that we can get everybody refinanced and out. The second thing that happened, which is more positive, bit of news for you, is a judgment was handed down from the Court of Appeal on Tuesday. It's known as the Angel case, and it's called Angel v Black Horse, but there are more than one defendants. There were 8 defendant banks in this action, and it surrounds what's known as an omnibus claim, and there is a relevance to PCP here. And what an omnibus claim means is, at this moment in time, our law firms have to argue each case on an individual basis. So Peter's claim would be, held just for Peter, Anne-Marie, and for the millions of people. An omnibus means that you could, if you had, let's say, 1,000 people with the same facts, and they have to be very, very similar facts, almost exactly the same, you can then now issue them. I should say you can issue them, on one claim form. And that was opposed. It was opposed by the 8 defendant banks in the Angel case. And that case was won favourably to the claimants on Tuesday. So the reason that has an impact on PCP, it has an impact going forward, more specifically on new claims, because new claims could be issued through the courts. But it also means that there is now a review that's going to happen with our law firms to see, do we not wait for these FOS redress cases? Do we just continue with court litigation, and then people can proceed on a bulk basis? Okay, that exercise is now being done by our law firms. We will not know the answer until possibly up to 14 days. So we may not be able to update you next week on it, but we should be able to give you an update the week after. The reason that is significant is because the cases that are suitable for litigation, because we started these cases in litigation, they were born in litigation, and then the redress scheme was meant to speed things up. So the irony of that, there we go. But the key takeaway is that the courts don't, the courts can now, under Angel, consider these omnibus claims. We have the support of the Johnson judgment. So if we want to continue in litigation, then that's something that's being assessed at this moment in time. It's a crucial judgment, not only for, new cases, but for historic ones, because now what we look at is potentially there could be a mechanism by which these cases could be adjudicated far quicker and could then be settled potentially by the courts. So it's a significant judgment, okay? Our law firms have to act in the best interest of their own clients in the first instance, but we will also be spending time and effort and getting legal advice if required on what is the most pragmatic way forward for the law firms and the claimants and for us as funders. Okay. I just want to go back to a point that I think I didn't make last week, which I think is important. So maybe a little bit of, I think if it was a newspaper, you'd call it a clarification. I just want to clarify a point. We've said to you that the scheme is open and that the cases are stayed, which is correct. However, what I did not express last week is that there was an implementation period. And the implementation period was due to end yesterday, and it did in fact end yesterday. And our law firms are in somewhat of a limbo at this moment in time, because where this implementation was there for the defendants and the law firms to bed down and agree the strategies and get going and get ready to make these settlements, and then increase the volume of these settlements as we were going forward. What has become clear is that unless this has happened today, whilst I've not become aware of it, our law firms are now in limbo, and the defendant banks are now in limbo. They don't know what to do, because there's parts of these schemes that are not being challenged. So there's part of these cases that technically, even with or without a forced scheme, can now be settled. No one knows what to do with them. The banks don't know what to do with them. The law firms don't know what to do with them. And it's very clear that we are expecting guidance from the FCA to tell us what's supposed to happen and how we're supposed to treat them. I say we as in law firms and defendants here, okay, in that vernacular. Because they can't act until they know what the guidelines are and what is expected of them. Neither can the banks. So the message is very clear. They don't know what they're doing. No one seems to know what they're doing. It's a complete mess, okay? And the reason we tell you these things is so that you can see that when we are giving you these updates and they change or appear to be changed, it's because if the people that are active participants in these actions cannot get clear guidance from the regulator, it's very difficult for anybody else to know how to react as well. So we were expecting this FCA statement very, very soon, if indeed it hasn't come out this morning, because there is a willingness to settle. Some of these banks have indicated a willingness to settle. There are calls being held shortly with some of our law firms and some of the defendant banks, because they've made indications they want to settle. But without this FCA guidelines, we don't know what that's going to look like. So even though a couple of the smaller banks with the smaller exposures want to settle it, there is still an exercise to be had. So it's not all doom and gloom. I think the clear-cut message at this moment in time, the factors that we do know, is that the upper tribunal will not be heard. It's very unlikely to be heard in 2026. It's very likely it's going to be January to March in 2027. Okay? So I kind of go full circle now back to the funding and what is the Armageddon position. So this funding is even more critical today than